If you're curious how much money you'll need to save for retirement, well, in this video, I'm going to walk you through how you do that and then take you through an example of how you can calculate how much money you should be saving and will ultimately need for your retirement. So this presentation is part of a larger course where I help educate you about many things that you need to know about retirement. And I'll put a link in the show notes to where you can learn more about that if you're interested in taking that. But in this section, we're going to cover estimating your retirement needs and expenses. And so there's really 5 steps you need to go through to figure out how much you're going to need to save for retirement. And this really works best if you're closer to retiring. If you're going to retire in the next couple years, the example that I'm going to go through makes the most sense. But even if you're a long ways off, stay tuned till the end where I'll show you how to take a few extra steps to calculate that. But the first step is to determine how much you need to spend per year in retirement. Second step is how much will you receive from Social Security? Next is, will you be eligible for a pension and what does that look like? Step 4 is, if you have other retirement income sources, how are those going to factor in and what might those look like? And then step 5 is looking at your investments, your 401k, your IRA accounts to figure out what those are worth and then estimating how much income those can generate for you. So step 1 is how much do you need to retire, right? And this is based upon completing a budget. This is going to be the best way to do this. There are other methods out there, like maybe you might have heard that you're only going to need 80% of what you're living on today in retirement. I would say a number like that is going to be best if you're 15, 20 years away from retiring. But if you're going to retire in the next year or two, chances are you're not going to be able to cut your expenses by 20%. Most of your expenses are going to be the same. The only expense that might be different is whether or not you're paying off your mortgage. If your mortgage is going away or some large debt that you have, then maybe that expense will be eliminated. But from doing this for hundreds of people, I've seen that most people's expenses really don't change all that much, and sometimes they actually go up in retirement. So you will want to account for any changes in your expenses in retirement. Let's just say, for example, you're retiring before age 65, in which you could go on Medicare. Then there might be an increase because if you're leaving your employer health insurance plan, that might be less costly on a monthly basis. But now you're going on to a private insurance plan or even an affordable care plan, there might be more expense there. So the better you are with these numbers, the more accurate your planning is going to be. Because if you're just winging it, if you're just guessing, then I don't think the numbers are going to be as accurate and your plan, your estimate is not going to look as good. So there are a number of ways that you can do this. If you go to the notes for this episode, there's a link to an Excel sheet that you can download from my website. Or you can go right to morrisseywealthmanagement.com. If you click on services and resources, there's a bunch of free tools that I have there. And one of them is your retirement budget. So this is an example of the retirement budget that I have available. So the first thing you'll be doing is calculating your fixed expenses. Those are expenses that are always going to be there in retirement. If you're paying rent, taxes, car payments, a lot of the credit cards, right? A lot of these expenses are fixed and they're not going to go away. Next is your variable/fixed expenses. So these are essential expenses, but they can vary. For example, like your food bill might vary, your heating oil, your electricity usage, those might vary. But a lot of these are essential expenses. So these first 2 categories of expenses are the needs. You're always going to most likely need to be paying for these things. So you want to know what that number is. And then the last category is really your discretionary expenses. What are the fun things that you want to do in retirement? Is there travel that you want to do? Are there hobbies that you want to pursue? Do you want to learn something new? Whatever it is, whatever these fun things are, maybe going out to restaurants more often, you want to calculate what that's going to look like so that you know, all right, I know what my bottom line number is, my need number is that I always have to have just to maintain my standard of living. But then you also can know what your wants are to know that, all right, these are the things I really want to do so that you can have both of those numbers. So you want to, as I said earlier, get as accurate as possible as what these expenses are going to look like now, but also for any changes in retirement, especially if you're moving. And a lot of people do move in retirement. What does that look like? Would there be an increase? Would there be a decrease? So once you have that, then you also need to think about inflation because, as I mentioned before, this presentation is really going to be best for people retiring in the next couple of years. But if you're retiring in 10 years or 15 years and you're watching this, you need to realize that your expenses today are going to be more expensive in 10 or 15 years because of inflation. If it's going to be a couple of years, it might not be as big of a change. But the easiest way that we measure inflation in the United States is according to the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. And that measures the cost of goods and services. But there are two things that are not included in CPI, one of them being the cost of food, the other being the cost of energy. So some people would argue that CPI is not really the best number that we could use, but for the purposes of estimating inflation, I think it's really the easiest way to do it. So if we look at CPI over the last 10 years, we've seen that it spiked in 2021, 2022. It came back a little bit in 2023. We don't know what it's going to be at for 2024, but the 10-year average has been 2.8%. So if you were using a rate of inflation to estimate the cost of goods and services, if you're 5 years or longer away from retirement, I would say you want to use 3%. And if you put that in context, if 3% was the assumed rate of inflation and you're 5 years away from retiring, then the cost of these same things are going to be 16% higher. If you're retiring in 10 years, it's 34% higher. In 15 years, 56% higher. And let's say you're retiring in 25 years, 100% higher. So that just gives you an idea that you have to think about inflation if you're doing this planning that you're not going to retire in a number of years. The next thing you have to think about is taxes. Unfortunately, most of your income in retirement is going to be taxable. Most of us have our money in IRAs and 401ks with pre-tax contributions. That means when you made the contribution, you got a tax deduction. But what it also means is when the money comes out, it's taxable. Really only Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks are going to be tax-free income from retirement accounts. And so most people don't have significant balances there, especially people who are close to retiring. So you're going to have to factor some type of taxes in there. And just for simplicity, I'm assuming a 25% federal tax rate, 25% combined federal and state tax rate for this example. So let's just say you went through this exercise, you went through and you did the budget, and it comes up to $5,500 per month in retirement, and you assumed you're going to pay 25% between federal and state tax. Then you need to gross up what you need because you need more than $5,500, assuming all your income's taxable in retirement. So you need about $6,875. Now this is an example. There are a lot of different ways you can try to estimate what your taxes will be in retirement. That's where your CPA, a financial advisor, can come in handy. This is something that I help clients do all the time. But for simplicity, we're just going to throw out a number there. And depending on where you move in retirement, certain states don't have income tax. So there's a lot of different factors to go into that. But you need to figure out how much tax are you roughly going to be paying on your income in retirement to realize that you need to take that out before you determine how much money that you need. So step 2, as I said, is estimating Social Security. What does your Social Security benefit look like? The easiest place to gather that would be to go to ssa.gov, which is where you can get your statement. If you haven't received one lately and maybe you didn't know it was important, you threw it out. So if you go to ssa.gov, in the top right, it says it says sign in. So if you click on sign in, you can either sign in if you've created an account, or if you've never created an account with Social Security, then you can create one. And this will allow you to be able to log in the future and download your statement. There's also a lot of handy calculators there. So you want to download your most recent statement so you know what your numbers look like. And the closer you are to retiring, the more accurate these numbers are going to be. Step 3, if you are eligible for a pension, gather the pension estimate as well. Sometimes you can do that right online if you know where to go. If it's your current company, chances are it's easier to find. If it's an old company, a company you worked for years ago, you might have to reach out to them through a phone call, letter, and request that pension estimate. I always tell people that if you're married, make sure that you get a joint estimate that shows not only what you can get as an individual, but how much you and your spouse could receive. So step 4 is factoring in other retirement income sources. For a lot of people, this isn't going to apply, but let's just say you're retiring young and you're planning to work part-time, or you're someone who really wants to work part-time because you like to stay busy, then you need to factor that in. How much income do you think you're going to make on a part-time basis? Or if you have rental properties or other income that really doesn't fall into any of the other categories we've mentioned, then you want to factor that in as well. So step 5 is getting an idea of what your investments are worth. And the best way to do this would be to put together a net worth statement if you've never done this before. This is an example of a free net worth statement that you can download if you click on the show notes, the link below, or also you can go to morrisseywealthmanagement.com/services/resources. So you'd be listing out your 401ks, IRAs, stocks, bonds, real estate, right? Any assets that you have that you could turn into retirement income. And we'll come back to this in a little bit. And then also any liabilities that you have. You really want your net worth to be growing as you're approaching retirement, because you should be saving money. Hopefully you're paying down any debt that you have, and you're being prudent about how your money's invested so that your investments are growing. If your net worth is going down as you're approaching retirement, that could be cause for concern. Maybe you're not invested properly. Maybe you have too much liabilities and you have too much debt. So that's something, to think about. In retirement, your net worth will most likely be going down because you've worked hard to save up this money and you're starting to spend it down. And that's the point of saving up this nest egg. So let's look at an example of a hypothetical couple. We have Bob and Cindy Jones, and Bob and Cindy plan to retire in 1 year, and they don't want to work during retirement. They've gone through the budget exercise, and their expenses come out to $5,500 a month. So as I mentioned earlier, we have to figure out how much taxes they're going to pay in retirement, and let's just assume all of their income is on a pre-tax basis, and they're taking IRA distributions mostly. So we're going to use a 25% combined federal and state tax rate. So if we add the 25% to their need for income, that gives us $6,875. That's how much they're going to need on a monthly basis before tax to cover their expenses. So if we assume that Bob and Cindy are both 65 and they want to retire in 1 year at 66, they're eligible for the following Social Security benefits. Bob could collect $2,400 per month at 66, and Cindy could collect $1,600, or they could wait until age 70 and Bob could receive $3,168, or Cindy could receive $2,100. Bob also worked for a company years ago that he's eligible for a pension from, and he reached out to the pension company and they gave him an estimate of $1,400 a month, and that's what's known as a 100% joint and survivor benefit, which means that as long as he or Cindy are alive, then they're going to keep getting that $1,400 a month. He could possibly get more if he did a single payout. Let's just say hypothetically he could get $1,700 a month, but if he died first, then Cindy wouldn't get anything. So that's when I was mentioning earlier about a couple getting a joint estimate. It's important to really strongly consider a joint pension estimate so that you have the highest probability to get the most out of the system. Bob and Cindy were also good savers, and they have the following assets. Bob has a 401k with $500,000 in it. Cindy's 401k has $100,000, and they have some stocks in a brokerage account worth $100,000. So they have $700,000 of assets saved up that they could use to fund their retirement. And this is where I was saying about calculating your net worth, why it's a good reason to do that. So they have then different choices as far as how much of that nest egg they take out. And you can see here I have rates from 3% all the way up to 5%. So if they're more aggressive as far as their view on investing, if they're comfortable having 60 to 70% of their portfolio invested in stock funds, they could take out 5%. Because the assumed rate of growth of the portfolio should be enough to sustain a 5% withdrawal. So that would be $35,000 on a monthly basis, or that would be $35,000 on an annual basis, or $2,900 on a monthly basis. Or if they're more conservative, let's say they don't like investment risk, they're going to keep most of their money in bonds and CDs, then they could take out 3%, which would be $21,000 a year, or $1,750 a month. So depending on your risk tolerance, depending on your allocation, really determines how much of your portfolio you could take out on an annual basis. So the next thing we want to do is we want to combine all this together. So if we look at their numbers in total, Bob's going to take his Social Security at 66, so is Cindy. So Bob's going to get $2,400, Cindy's going to get $1,600, Bob's going to get $1,400 from his pension, and they have a moderate portfolio, moderate risk level, so they're going to take out just 4%, which equals $2,300 a month. So we add all that together, and that gives them a total income on a pre-tax basis of $7,733. If you remember, their income need was $6,875. So if Bob and Cindy did a good job of estimating their retirement expenses, their numbers are accurate, they should be fine retiring because they have more than enough as far as what they estimated that they need. So the question for you is, how much do you need? So you'd want to go through the steps that I laid out. Step 1, estimating your retirement expenses, then looking at your retirement income sources from Social Security, from a pension, if you're eligible for any other income sources, and then looking at what your current investment portfolio is valued at, and coming up with your numbers. Are you on track? Are you off track? So this is really the starting point for knowing how you stand as far as whether you're ready to retire. And a financial advisor could also be very helpful in this. I try to make this as easy as possible, but there's other things to consider, and that's where the help of a financial advisor, myself or another, could be very helpful. The other thing is that what if you don't have enough money to retire? Well, what should you do? There's definitely a number of options. You can work longer. It's certainly something that I never like to have to tell someone that I'm helping, but that might be one of the best solutions because that also means that your portfolio grows more, you save more, and you're also possibly delaying when you collect Social Security or a pension. You could delay Social Security. You could still retire, but maybe you could delay until 70 to get the maximum benefit. You could work part-time in retirement. You could possibly reduce expenses. That's not always available to everyone, but maybe you could downsize. You could sell your house and rent. You could move in with someone, a friend, a family member, a child, right? Or you could just, if you're going to delay your retirement, you could maybe also save more. So how do you incorporate additional savings into your plan? Well, there's a number of online calculators that you can use, but there's one from the SEC that I'd like to show you. So this is an online savings calculator from at investor.gov. And this will be helpful if you are a number of years away from retiring. Let's say you're not retiring for 15 years and you want to know how your additional savings is going to factor into your portfolio. So let's just say you have a portfolio right now of $400,000 and you're saving an additional $1,500 a month in your 401k between what you put in and what your employer matches. And again, you're 15 years away from retiring. And I'm going to assume a 6% growth rate. I wouldn't advocate assuming a higher growth rate than that because it might not be realistic. 6% is something that could definitely happen if you have a portfolio that's more invested in stocks or stock funds. So if we then calculate what that's going to be worth, it tells us that your current portfolio of $400,000, continuing to invest $1,500 a month for 15 years, will grow to $1.3 million. So that's one way that you can see, all right, here's what I have, here's what it's going to look like. Is that going to be enough? Another way is that, let's just say you decided that you need to save an additional $500,000. Or I should say your goal, let's make the goal different. Your goal is to have $1 million when you retire. And you're starting with, again, 400, we'll make a different example. You're starting with $500,000 and you're going to retire in 10 years. And you're assuming the same 6% rate. How much additional savings do you need to invest? This is telling you that you need to save an additional $662 a month for you to hit that goal. So again, this is another calculator that's on investor.gov. But this is another way that you can figure out those numbers and you can decide whether or not you're on track or not. The other thing is that you can always back into what you need. If you decide that you need, let's say, $50,000 a year of income and you assume you can take out 5% of your portfolio, well, that's telling you you're going to need to save up $1 million to hit that goal. So I hope this video was helpful. And again, this is part of a online retirement planning course that I offer. So I'll put a link below to that course. If you want to learn more about retirement planning, you can consider signing up for this course. And I hope that you found it helpful. If you like this video, please subscribe below. Thanks for watching.